Hello and welcome once again to one of our videos. In this series we're talking about stress and teenagers in particular. And today we're going to be answering the question, do teenagers feel more stress than adults? There's a growing body of research that says yes they do, but we'll be talking about exactly why that is and what to do about it in this video. In a number of these videos, we have talked about the teen brain, its development. So we'll look at that once again in relationship to stress. We also want to look at how this will factor into real life. So what's going on in the real world as teenagers experience stress. Yes, once again, social media. It's a recurring theme that I think emphasizes the importance of it because it comes up over and over. And lastly, we want to have a conversation about the expectations teens feel and how all those things play in. That's what we'll be talking about next. We've talked about the development of the brain for teens in some other videos, and the amygdala is it's going through its development during this phase. And teenagers, that's that part of the brain, the fear, flight, freeze aspect, controls all that. And that's really active for teenagers in general. The APA has actually reported, that's American Psychological Association, has reported that on average, teens experience higher levels of stress than adults, and they don't handle it as well. All right, so if you put those two together, they are feeling more stress, in part because of the development of the brain, but also the brain isn't fully developed yet, and all these neurological connections and all this training on how to deal with stress, that hasn't fully developed yet. So naturally, teenagers are having more difficult reactions to stress. They aren't handling stress as well as adults. Now, we know from statistics that adults are having a hard time handling it as well. We have some of those numbers. So let's put those pieces together. One, teenagers aren't getting the education, in part because adults aren't necessarily handling it as well. Even though they're handling it better, there's no model there. The brain isn't fully developed, so teenagers have to actually be working at developing these skills, but we aren't doing that. We aren't giving them those skills. We aren't giving them the opportunity to train. We put them in these pressure situations, academic testing, trying to get into high college, all these things, and we aren't giving them the skills to manage the emotions, and their brain hasn't developed it, so we're creating a challenging situation for teenagers. All right, so how does this play out in the body and behaviors of teenagers? Well, there was a study that was done that shows that teenagers under stress have longer release of cortisol. So as that cortisol is being released over a longer period of time, it impacts their memory, their emotional responses, all these things that then increase the likelihood of anxiety and depression. So let's try to picture this by telling you just a couple stories of some former students. Each were in environments that were creating stress for them. One of them grew up in a just highly dysfunctional home, poverty, right? Overcrowded home, not well kept, not good cleanliness, none of that. So there was a lot of issues with hygiene and just coming to school looking, feeling good, cluttered mind, cluttered environment. That child was under stress regularly, right? So as they're under stress, they aren't performing as well, and the whole family had drug and alcohol issues. It was ripe for disaster. So one of the things we had to try to do is begin to break that cycle, to change how that person was dealing with that stress. But they were under a lot more stress. Another child who was in a much better home life, but was under stress a lot because the parents were fighting regularly. A lot of conflict between the parents. The parents ended up separating. That created issues. Then there was a bouncing back from one home to another home, and concern about his younger brother. And all of this stress exasperated issues at school and socially and everything else. Those are two examples of teenagers who, because they were in stress, that slow release of the cortisol began to impact all of those things biologically, and then it impacted their behavior and what was going on in their life. Now, you might think I'm on a crusade against social media by the constant referral to social media's impact on teenagers. But the research points to this direction, personal experience points to this direction. So we need to begin to understand what's going on. And it is having an impact. There's just no two buts about it. We need to recognize that so we can handle it in a proper way, in a reasonable way. But the more kids use social media at their age and with their development of their mind and not having, as we've already talked about, some of the skills and the development neurologically to handle stress as well. And we are giving them a tool that now puts them in this social feedback loop 24/7 with no break from it. And that social feedback loop sets up this comparison that so often for so many is negative. And then they begin to try to deal with that in so many different ways that aren't healthy for many of them. This is not the only explanation by any stretch of the imagination for the increases that we are seeing for anxiety, depression, other mental health challenges facing teens, but it is significant. And we can, when you look at the data, you go back at the time these smartphones came out and social media took off, there is at least high correlation in some research showing causation impact between the two. Well, one of the questions that we maybe should ask ourselves is, are teenagers, are the weight of their expectations greater now than they have been in the past? And there's not a whole lot of real hard data on measuring that. But there are some subtle things socially, culturally, and all that I think indicate that in their experience, these expectations are becoming really high for them. So one of the things I'm talking about is there's more pressure for school districts to make sure their students are performing because funding can often be tied to how well they're performing on these standardized tests that are being mandated. So there's sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle pressures that, we really need you guys to be at your best, to really do well as you can on these tests. We use these tests to help improve our curriculum and our educational thing. This message is not hiding the fact for many students that the quality of the school, their education that they're going to get, the funding that comes with this, depends on how well they do on these tests. And high-performing districts, that the kids are smart enough and well-versed enough that that expectation weighs on them. And then getting into the right college. Kids who go to Ivy schools make more money. What about paying for college, winning scholarships? All of these sort of hidden expectations kids are aware of. And then you add to that things like social media and all those sort of pressures and keeping up with the Joneses, that whole kind of syndrome. are weighing in on teenagers and creates stress as they're trying to live up to these expectations. We've come to the end of yet another video. And once again, I encourage you guys to subscribe to the channel, check out our other videos. You know, there's a mindset is really going to be behind a lot of the solutions that we have for this. We do have a free webinar that would encourage you to also register for, Empower in Excel, and that will be, you know, students can get a lot out of that as well as parents. So check that webinar out today and take some good notes, and hopefully I'll see you back in another video.